Chapter 26. Beneath the Green Canopy. 30 October, noon. "They're hiding in there," Telius said to Johnstone, looking through binoculars into a mass of sword ferns on the forest floor. The two men were hanging upside down in their seat harnesses in the hexapod. The machine intern hung upside down from a leaf in the pandanus tree, clinging to the leaf with its feet. They had been able to get a fix on the radios. Telius stared for a while, then gestured silently with one finger. "Drop us." Johnstone hit a button and the footpads let go of the leaf, and the hexapod went into free fall. Johnstone, working the controls, folded the legs under the vehicle as it fell. It tumbled a few times, its legs tucked underneath it, and hit the ground, and bounced and came to rest upside down. The roll cage had protected the humans inside. Johnstone popped open the legs. They lashed out and flipped the vehicle upright, and the hexapod moved off, stalking its way around the edge of the fern forest, and went into the ferns. Telius stood up and turned his head, listening. He had heard them talking. He indicated with his finger where the people were, then directed Johnstone to drive up a fern stem. The hexapod climbed the stem, got in among the fronds, and stopped. Telius took up the binoculars and steered through them. He had acquired the targets, 6 of them, down below. Somebody was sick, had a bloody nose. Might be the Bens. The others were gathered around the victim. Indian guy, looked like. Blood streamed from the guy's nose and over his upper lip and chin. Yep, the man had the bends. He was a goner. "Poor fuckers having a bend bleed out," he murmured to Johnstone, who grunted. As he studied the group, Telius identified the leader, slender guy, light brown curly hair, standing slightly apart and talking to the others, who listened. This was the individual who'd taken leadership of the group. Telius could see it. Telius could always tell an officer. You drop the officer first, of course. "A good setup," Telius nodded to Johnstone, and took up the gas rifle, and aimed it at the group's leader, while Johnstone took up spotter duty, training his binoculars on the target and speaking to Telius. Telius looked through the scope and put the crosshairs on the leader's head. The range was long, about 4 meters. A slight breeze stirred the fern, leaf, and the hexapod. Telius shook his head. Not stable. The shot was a little chancy, and Telius left nothing to chance. He would have to make several kills in quick succession on moving targets, because the moment he dropped the leader, the others would scatter like frightened rabbits. He gestured to Johnstone, meaning get us lower. Johnstone turned the vehicle and it began creeping down the fern leaf, hunting for a more stable position. Then Telius signaled to Johnstone to stop. Telius unbuckled himself and fell out of the hexapod, spun once in the air, and landed on the ground on all fours like a cat, rifle on his back. He crept closer to the targets. Peter broke open the medical kit and knelt over Amar, holding a compass to Amar's nose. He didn't know what to do. The nosebleed would not stop. "I'm useless. Please go on," Amar said. "We are not going to leave you. I'm just protein. Leave me." "Amar's right," Danny said, touching his sling arm. "We have to leave him, or we'll all die." Ignoring Denny, Peter took the compress away from Amar's nose. It was soaked. He had lost a lot of blood, and he had become anemic. And the bruises all over Amar's arms. It seemed as if the centipede venom had accelerated the bends in Amar. And decompression was the only treatment for the bends. Yet they were no closer to Nanogen. "We have to call for help on the radio," Denny said, plunking himself down and glowering at the others. "Denny could be right," Erica said. "Maybe there is some good person at Nanogen." "Maybe we should call," Karen said. "It might be our only chance to save Amar." Peter stood up, holding a radio headset. "All right." From lower down on the front stem, Telius took aim. He had the leader in the crosshairs of his gas rifle, but now the leader was bending over the guy with the bends, trying to help him. Maybe he could get both of them with one shot. The leader and the bleeder. Yeah. He adjusted his aim, squeezed the trigger, and the gas rifle kicked viciously. There was a sudden hiss. A steel needle, seemingly a foot long, zipped past Peter's neck, tearing his shirt, and entered Amar's sing, and detonated. The explosion threw metal fragments and blood in all directions. Amar jerked into the air, yanked off the ground, and his body seemed to come apart. Peter froze, a quizzical expression on his face, while Amar and pieces of Amar spattered around Peter. Peter stood up, covered with Amar's blood. "What?" he began. The others watched it happen, as if it wasn't real. Karen looked around. "Sniper!" she screamed. "Get cover!" She began to dash for the nearest fern, but saw that Peter wasn't moving. He seemed paralyzed, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. The sniper's second shot hit a leaf over Peter's head and exploded. The blast sent Peter to the ground. Kieran realized the sniper was aiming for Peter. She swerved and ran toward Peter and grabbed him. "Duck and zigzag," she screamed at him. He needed to get away, but not make any predictable movements. The sniper could pull lead on Peter and hit him as he ran. "Go," she yelled at Peter. Peter understood. He began to run. Left, right, left, left, stop. Run. Always heading for the cover of ferns. Karen ran, too, zigzagging, staying with Peter, but not too close to him, wondering if the next shot... Peter tripped, fell, and sprawled. "Peter," she screamed. No, Peter had stopped moving. He had become an easy target. "Karen, get away," Peter said, hauling himself to his feet. These were his last words. In the next instant, a needle flew through Peter's chest, exploding as it went. He toppled. Peter Jansen was dead before he hit the ground. Part 3. Tantalus. Chapter 27. Fern Gully, 30, October, 12:15 p.m. Ricardo felt Ken King lift him up by his shirt, dragging him out of what he thought was a good hiding place, and heard her say, "Get up, go." He noticed his blowgun lying on the ground, picked it up, grabbed the dart kit, and sprinted for cover. He lost track of Karen. He had no idea where she had gone. He ran underneath a stick, bashed through some leaves, and began to run among fern stems, looming over him. That was when he saw the insect vehicle, a six-legged truck up there on the fern, clinging to a frond and moving along it, making a faint whine. Driven by a man wearing armor. It was a man just Rick's size, a microhuman. The man seemed experienced and confident. The man stopped the vehicle, held up a strange-looking gun with a large caliber muzzle. He loaded a metal needle in the breech, took aim through a scope, and fired. The gun kicked, giving off a hiss. Rick had flung himself down behind a rock, where he lay on his back, panting, while he watched the man shoot. The man seemed relaxed, comfortable with murder, Rick realized, with a hot rage welled up in him. The man had butchered Peter and Amar in cold blood. Rick was still holding the blow tube. Get off a dart at that bastard, anyway. I think Karen just saved my life. It was dumb to stay crouched like that. She pulled my ass out of a bad place. He opened his dart kit and took out a dart, looked at it with a sense of futility. It was just a splinter with a metal point made from a dinner fork. Never get through that bastard's armor. He opened the corral jar and jammed the tip into the sludge and trolled it, choking back and cough as an odor wafted from the jar. Put a hot load on the dart anyway. He fitted the dart into the tube and rolled over and looked out past the rock. The vehicle wasn't there. It had moved out of sight. Where? Rick crept out from behind the rock, listening, looking around. He heard a whining sound to his left. The bug truck. He got up and ran toward the sound. and when it got louder, he dove into a clump of moss and waited. The sound got closer. Carefully, he looked out of the moss. The bug truck had crawled up on the moss and stopped, almost directly above him. He was looking at the bottom of the truck. He couldn't see the man from here. There was another hiss. The man had fired again. Rick had no idea if anyone but himself was still alive. Karen could be dead. Erica too. They were being slaughtered. It made him furious. It made him want to kill, even if it cost him his life. The man had stopped firing, and now the truck advanced. It came to a halt, a short distance away, and he heard the man talking on a radio. "There's a female at your 3 o'clock. Bitch has a knife. Bitch. Karen." No. She was about to be shot. He started crawling frantically through the moss, then got himself wedged under a fallen leaf. He was looking right up at the man. The man wore a helmet, a breastplate, armored plates over his arms. His chin was bare neck. Rick aimed for the man's neck, tried to hit him in the jugular. He inhaled slowly, trying not to make a sound, and blew with all his might. The dot missed the man's neck, but landed in the soft flesh under his chin, and drove deep, buried up to its fluff. It had entered the man's chin just above his Adam's apple, and gone upward. Rick heard a choking scream, and the man tumbled down into the vehicle, out of sight. He heard Witkoff, then thrashing, thumping. The guy was seizing, flopping around like a fish inside the truck. Then silence. Rick loaded another dot into the blowgun, and jumped up on the truck, ready to shoot again. He looked inside. The man lay sprawled, face cherry red, eyes popping, frothy mucus drizzling out of his mouth. Cyanide poisoning, Rick realized. Only the tail puff of the dot remained visible, a wisp of cotton stuck under the man's chin. The dot had punched vertically upward, through his tongue and the roof of his mouth, and pierced his brain. That was for Peter, he said. His hands were shaking. Then his whole body began to shake. He had never killed a person before. Hadn't thought he was capable of it. Off to his right, he heard another hiss. Oh fuck, not another one, he thought. Another sniper out there, shooting at my friends. Get the bastard. Rick leaped from the truck and began running towards the sound. Holding the loaded blowgun as he ran, he noticed that things had gotten darker overhead, and then he saw a shadow moving in the ferns. He stopped running. Suddenly, he felt very, very small and completely powerless. He couldn't believe how big the damned thing was. Cameron saw the man rise up between two fern stems. He was a small man, agile, and cat-like in his movements. He wore camel armor and a glove on his right hand. His left hand was bare and was closed around the gun's trigger, and the gun was aimed at her. He was about 1 meter away, close enough. She had drawn her knife. It was no match for the gun. She glanced around. No cover. He moved out from behind the fern stems, keeping the gun trained on her. He seemed to be playing with her, for he could make the shot easily. He spoke into a throat mic, found her. After a pause, he added, "You copy." Evidently, he didn't get an answer. Copy. He still didn't get an answer. He stepped forward. It was then that Karen saw the shadow behind the man. At first, she didn't know what it was. She saw something brown and covered with fur, buried in a cluster of fern fronds. It moved slightly, then stopped. She thought it must be a mammal, maybe a rat, because of the brown fur, and because it was really big. But then a leg appeared, a long, tapering, jointed leg, an exoskeleton, covered with bristly brown hair. Then a fern frond was pushed aside, and she saw the eyes, all 8 of them. It was an enormous spider, as big as a house. The spider was so vast, it seemed almost unrecognizable as a spider. Karen knew the species, though. It was a brown huntsman, common in the tropics. It was a carnivore, too. Huntsman spiders don't build webs. They are ambush predators, and they hunt on the ground. This one was holding its body close to the ground, a sign that it was hunting. It had a flattened body, protected by hair, with sickle-shaped fangs, folded under bulbous appendages. This one was a female. She would crave protein, Karen knew, since she was making eggs. Karen was struck by the stillness of the spider. Since it was an ambush predator, the fact that it wasn't moving was bad news. This meant it was hunting. The man stood with his back to the spider, unaware of it. Its constellation of eyes stared at the man, like droplets of black glass. Karen heard a soft, moaning intake and exhalation of air flowing through the spider's lungs. Located in the spider's abdomen. "Johnstone, do you copy?" the man said. He paused, listening for his partner. "What happened to your friend?" Karen whispered. "Make him talk." He just looked at her, not a chatty one. She kept her body very still. No sudden movements. She knew that a spider couldn't see very well, even with so many eyes. But a spider had highly accurate hearing. 10 ears were scattered over each leg, holes in its armor that picked up sounds. 80 ears, all told. In addition, the thousands of hairs on its legs were also listening devices. vibration sensors. The hearing organs on its legs gave the spider a 3D sound image of the world. If she made any noise or vibration, the spider would form a sonic image of her, would recognize her as prey. The attack, she knew, would happen in the blink of an eye. She knelt, very slowly, and picked up a rock. Raised her arm slowly. The man smiled. Go ahead, if it makes you feel better. She threw the rock at him. It struck his breastplate, and bounced off with a thump. He raised his gun at her, and took aim through the scope, and chuckled, just as the fangs closed around him and yanked him into the air, crushing his gun. He screamed. The spider took a few steps forward, and then, surprisingly, flipped itself over on its back, while Cameron sprinted for safety. Lying on its back, it lifted the man into the air, sinking its fangs deeper. The razor-sharp, hollow tips punched through the man's armor, and began pumping venom into him. His body was swelled up as the venom pressurized it, until his armor began to make popping sounds, and blood mixed with venom began squirting out of the cracks in the armor. As the venom went to work, his spine curved backward, and his head ripped back and forth. Neurotoxins in the venom set off a firestorm in his central nervous system. He began to writhe and went into convulsions, a grand mal seizure. As he seized, his eyes rolled up into his head, until only the rights showed. Then, abruptly, the rights turned hot red. Blood vessels had burst in his eyes, as they were rupturing everywhere in his body, for the venom contained digestive enzymes that liquefy flesh. Internal hemorrhages flooded the man's body, until his heart stopped. The spider venom was Ebola in 30 seconds. The spider continued to pump poison into the body until the armor began to crack and split. The breastplate popped open, and the man's viscera peeked out, drizzling venom. Karen had taken cover behind a fern, where she found Rick crouching, blowpipe in hand. They watched the spider process its meal. Having killed the prey while it lay on its back, the spider flipped over and stood upright on its 8 legs again, and began cutting up the prey. It gripped the man in its palps, a pair of hand-like appendages on either side of its mouth. The fangs opened like folding knives. They had serrated inner blades. The blades masqueraded the body, chopping it into a bloody mash of flesh. Broken bones and intestinal contents, mixed with scraps of Kevlar and pieces of plastic. Using its palps, the spider handled the meat mass deftly, molding and shaping it into a food ball, while squirting digestive fluid into the mass through the tips of its fangs. In a minute or two, the human remains had been turned into a spheroid of licorice pap speckled with bone fragments and shredded armor. Interesting, Karen whispered, and turned to Rick. Spiders digest their food outside their bodies. I didn't know. Having digested its prey, the spider placed its mouth firmly on the food ball and began sucking fluids out of the mess, while its stomach made a steady pumping noise. The eyes gleamed with a faraway expression, Karen thought, or maybe a look of satisfaction. Do we need to worry? Rick asked. Nah, she's busy. But we should get out of here before she starts hunting again. They began calling for Erica and Danny. Erica had hidden herself under a hibiscus flower, and Danny had tucked himself under a tree root. There were 4 survivors now. Rick, Karen, Erica, and Danny. They gathered themselves, put on the packs, and hurried off into the ferns, abandoning the bodies of Peter and Amar, while a sense of terrible emptiness swept over them. Amos Singh, a gentle person who loved plants, was gone. Peter Jansen, gone. It had not seemed possible that Peter could die. The loss of Peter had devastated them. He was so steady, Rick said. I really thought he could bring us through. Peter was our hope, Erica said. She began to cry. I believe he would save us, somehow. This is what I predicted, Danny said. He sat down and adjusted his arm sling. Then with his good hand, unstuck some duct tape on his grass shoe and stuck it back in place, trying to tighten his shoe. Then he put his head down between his knees. His muffled voice rose up. The inevitable has happened. The catastrophe. We are completely, totally, utterly dead. Actually, we are still alive, Rick said. Not for long, Danny muttered. Karen said, we all had faith in Peter. He was so calm. He never lost his courage. She wiped sweat from her face and hefted her pack, adjusting it, and kept walking. Karen could hardly admit it to herself, but for the first time she had lost her nerve entirely. She was petrified. She couldn't see how they would ever get back to Nanajan. Peter was the only person who could lead us. Now we don't have a leader. Yeah, and it's clear that Drake knows we're alive and is trying to kill us. Sending hired killers to take us out, Rick said. We got rid of 2 goons, but who knows who else is out there with orders to kill us. 2 of them? Ken asked him. Rick answered her with a grim smile. Look straight ahead. The hexapod stood crookedly on top of a mound of moss. Rick leaped into the vehicle. A moment later, a body was flung out, spinning through the air, and landed with a crash at Karen's feet. She saw the man's armor, the dot embedded in the man's chin, the eyes bulging, the foamy tongue thrust out. She drew in her breath. There had been 2 snipers. Rick had said nothing about it until now. You killed this man? Get in, Rick said, busying himself with the controls. We are driving to Tantalus, and we've got a gun. Chapter 28, Manoa Valley, 30, October, 1:45 p.m. The pickup truck wound up the single-lane road leading to the Manoa Valley. It was a beat-up Toyota, spray-painted several different colors, with a surfboard rack and fat tires that seemed affected by elephantiasis. It arrived at the gate in front of the tunnel and stopped, and a man got out. He walked up to the gate and read the sign. Private, no admittance. Shit, Erica Jensen rattled the gate. He examined the lock. It was a keypad. He tried some corporate codes, but nothing worked. Fucking Vin had changed the code on the lock for sure, Eric thought. He backed around and drove down the road a short distance to a turnout, where he rammed the truck into the undergrowth. If anybody from Nanogen noticed it, they'd assumed he was a pot farmer gone off to tend his crop on the mountain, not a vice president of the company, looking for his brother. He put on a knapsack and hurried down the road, slipped underneath the gate, jogged down the tunnel. Beyond the tunnel, in the valley, he went off the road and into the forest, out of sight, where he opened the knapsack and took out a laptop computer and a complicated-looking box of electronic circuits. It had a homemade look, soldered boards and antenna. He put on a pair of headphones and began to listen, scanning around the 70 gigahertz band. He heard nothing. He switched frequencies, checking the band of Nanogen's private wireless communication network, and heard a garbled hiss. He always heard it. Intra-company chatter. The problem was to decipher it. He waited 3 hours, listening, until the battery began to run down. He packed up the gear and hurried down the road, through the tunnel and back to the truck, and drove off. Nobody had noticed him. Nobody had been around anyway. He would be back tomorrow to listen again, just in case Peter and the others were somewhere in the valley. He didn't know where they were, only that they had gone missing. Chapter 29, Honolulu, 30, October, 1 o'clock p.m. In his windowless office, Dan Watanabe called an officer in the missing persons detail. Let me know if any new information about those students comes up. Funny you should ask. You want to call Nancy Harfield. She's out in District 8 right now. Sergeant Nancy Harfield was in the Traffic Division. District 8 covered the southwest side of Oahu. I'm at Kaina, she said to him. We've got a luxury car upside down in the tidal inlet below the 1929 bridge. The vehicle is registered to one Allison F. Bender / Nanogen Microtechnologies. There's a body trapped under the vehicle. Female by appearance. No other bodies visible. "I'd like to have a look," Watanabe said. He got in his brown, unmarked Ford Crown Victoria and drove it at an easy 90 along the freeway around Pearl Harbor. He continued into Waianae, a town that lay on the southwest coast of Oahu. This was the leeward side of the island, dry and sunny, where the beaches were lapped by gentle waves, and the smallest keikis could play and paddle. It was the rougher side of the island, in terms of law enforcement, though. Lots of car break-ins and petty thefts, but little or no violence anyway. Back in the 1800s, in the days of the Kingdom of Hawaii, the leeward side of Oahu had been a violent place, a haven for bandits, who robbed and murdered people who ventured there. Now it was mostly property crimes. At Kaena Point, a car rested upside down in shallow water. The police department's heaviest winch truck was parked on the road. A cable ran from the truck down through how tangled to the car. It had been a nasty job for getting the cable down through the brush. The car tipped as the cable yanked on it, and it flipped over, landing right side up. A dark blue Bentley convertible, its soft top torn and crushed. Sand and water streamed out of the car, and a dead woman sat in the driver's seat, creepily upright. Watanabe made his way down the slope. He tore his slacks and slipped and skidded, regretting that he wore street shoes. By the time he reached the car, the cable had winched it out on the rocks. The dead woman wore a dark business suit. Her hair swirled around her face and clogged her mouth. Her eyes were gone. Reef fish had eaten them. He leaned into the car, past the corpse, and looked around. He saw articles of clothing plastered all over the red compartment, clinging to the seats and caught in the twisted metal of the convertible's top. Board shorts, a belt made of snake skin, chewed by fish. A woman's underpants, lime green. Another pair of board shorts, with a tag still on them. Just purchased. A Hero high t-shirt, a pair of bootcut jeans with a hole in the right knee. Was the lady going to do laundry? He remarked to an officer. The clothing was the sort that younger people wear. He noticed a plastic jug wedged under the dashboard and took it out and studied the label. Ethanol. He found a wallet in the back seat. It held a Massachusetts driver's license belonging to one Jenny H. Lynn, one of the missing students. But there were no bodies in the car other than the woman's, which might or might not be Allison Bender. That would have to wait for the medical examiner. He climbed back up to the road. There, Nancy Harfield and another officer had photographed and measured the tire tracks in the grit leading over the shoulder of the road. Watanabe looked at Harfield. So, what do you think? Looks like the car stopped here before it went over. Then it rolled straight off. Harfield had searched carefully around the tire tracks for any shoe prints in the gravel. The gravel was scuffed, but there was no clear shoe prints. She went on. It looks like the driver stopped right here. Then the car goes off the edge. No use of the brakes. If she'd braked, you'd see the skid marks in the dirt. No skid marks means no attempt to stop. She could have sat here for a while, making up her mind, then touched the gas and went over. Suicide, Watanabe asked her. That's a possibility. It's consistent with these marks. The evidence squad took photographs and video. They bagged the body and loaded it into an ambulance, which drove off silently, lights flashing. The totaled Bentley followed, riding on the deck of the police tow truck, still dripping seawater. Watanabe ended up back at his desk at headquarters, looking at the scratched metal wall he would stare at sometimes to clarify his thoughts. He couldn't get over the feeling that somebody had put the clothing in the car, especially that wallet. People who are planning to go off don't leave their wallets behind. If Jenny Lynn had gone off voluntarily, she would have taken her wallet with her. What if she hadn't gone voluntarily? Maybe kidnapped. Had this been a boating accident? A lost boat would explain so many people missing at the same time. He called the Property Crimes Unit and asked if there were any reports of missing boats. Not lately. He stared at the wall some more. It might be time to eat an emergency spam sushi. But then his phone rang. It was an officer in the missing persons unit. I've got another one for you. Yeah, who? Joanna Kinski called to report her husband didn't come home from work last night. He's an engineer at Nanogen. Another Nanogen missing? You've got to be kidding. Miss Kinski says she called the company. Nobody's seen her husband since yesterday afternoon. The Nanogen security chief hadn't reported this one. There were just too many Nanogen's people dropping out of sight in the quiet little Honolulu town. Another phone call. It was Dorothy Gutt, a forensic scientist in the scientific investigation section. Dan, would you come down and take a look at something? It's the Fong case. I found something. Shit, the really Fong mess. Not what he needed right now. Don Michele walked into Vindrick's office. He had a disturbed look on his face. Telius and Johnstones are dead. Drick gritted his teeth. What happened? I lost radio contact with them. They had located the survivors. They had begun the rescue operation, Michele said. He was fretting again. Right in the middle of this, they were attacked by something. I heard screaming, and then Telius, well, he got eaten. Eaten? I heard it. Some kind of predator. His radio went dead. I called for a long time. There were no more transmissions. What do you think? I think everybody's dead. Why? My men were the best. Something got through their weapons and armor. So the students. Michele shook his head. Not a chance. Drake leaned back. So there was an accident with a predator. Michele sucked on his lips. When I was in Afghanistan, I noticed something about accidents. What's that? Drake asked. Accidents happen more often to assholes. Drake chuckled. That's true. The rescue, it failed, sir. Drake realized that Don Michele understood exactly what was meant by rescue. Nevertheless, Drake had his doubts. How can you be sure, Don, that the rescue failed? There's no survivors. I am sure of it. Show me the bodies. But there aren't. I will not believe the students are dead until I see evidence of their deaths. Drake leaned back. As long as there's hope, we will spare no effort to save them. No effort. Am I clear? Michele left Drake's office without saying a word. There was nothing to say. As for Vin Drake, he felt reasonably good about what had happened to Telius and Johnstone. It meant he didn't have to pay them bonuses in valuable stock. Nevertheless, he could not assume that all the students were dead. They had shown some survival skills, surprising tenacity, and so he would continue to try to flush them out, just in case some of them were still alive. Chapter 30. The Pally, 30 October, 4:00 p.m. This thing would kick ass in Boston traffic, Karen King remarked. She was driving the hexapod up a steep slope, guiding it across a jumble of rocks and grass stems. It lurched. Please, watch my arm. Danny was sitting in the passenger seat, gripping his left arm, which hung like a sausage in the sling. It had become badly swollen, filling the sleeve of his shirt. The hexapod moved along steadily, its legs whining, climbing through a vast vertical world, glowing with a million shades of green. In the cargo compartment in back, Erica sat huddled, tied in with rope. Rick rocked along beside the vehicle, holding the gas rifle and looking around, alert for predators. A bandolier of needle bullets slung over his shoulder. The terrain had gotten very steep. The sword had given way to crumbly lava pebbles, and grit with protruding masses of lava rock, everything festooned with grasses and small ferns. Currant grava trees twisted this way and that, mixed with thin, straight shafts of loulu palms. Many of the trees were draped with vines, branches roused in a steady wind that blew across the mountain face, and the breeze occasionally battered the truck and the humans. A wall of mist drifted through the vegetations, a cloud followed by brilliant sunshine. The deaths of Peter Jansen and Amar Singh weighed on the students. Their group had been winnowed from 8 people stranded in the microworld down to 4 survivors. Their number had been cut in half in just 2 days. 50% fatalities. That was a horrible statistic, thought Ricardo. It was worse than the life expectancy of soldiers fighting on the beaches of Normandy. Rick could see more fatalities coming. Unless by some miracle they were rescued. But they couldn't reveal themselves to anyone at Nanogen now. For Vin Drake had mobilized his resources to try to find them and make them disappear. "Drake's still looking for us," Rick remarked. "I'm sure of it." "That's enough," Karen said to him. There was no point talking about Vin Drake, since all that did was to make them feel more helpless. "Peter wouldn't give up," Karen said to Rick, more calmly as she worked the controls, guiding the truck straight up the face of a large rock. Rick jumped on board for the ride. They had gotten into mountain vegetation. Occasionally gaps in the canopy revealed a striking vista. Cliffs and blades of the valley plunged all around, and a waterfall roared nearby. Somewhere above them, a curving stretch of ridge formed the lip of Tantalus crater. As the machine marched along, its feet stirred up living things. Startled springing tails bounced away, flipping through the air. Worms wriggled and seethed. Mites scuttled here and there, sometimes climbing up the legs of the hexapod. They had to keep brushing mites off the vehicle, or the creatures would crawl around inside it and all over the gear, dropping small blobs of mites dung and getting everything dirty. And in the air, all around, insects by the thousands flew, humming past, spiraling around, glittering in the sunlight. "I can't stand all this life," Danny complained. He hunched forward over his bad arm, looking utterly miserable. "If the batteries last," Rick was saying, "we might make Tantalus by nightfall." "What then?" Karen said, working the controls. "We do reconnaissance, watch the base, then decide our next move. What if the base isn't there, torn out just like the stations?" "Do you have to be such a pessimist?" "I'm just trying to stay realistic, Rick." "Fine, Karen. Tell me your plan." Karen didn't have a plan, so she didn't answer Rick. "Just get to Tantalus and hope something turns up." It wasn't a plan. It was a Hail Mary pass. As they moved along, Karen considered their situations. She was profoundly frightened. She had to admit it. But her fear also made her feel very alive. She wondered how much longer she had to live. Maybe a day, maybe hours. Better make the best of it, just in case your life turns out to be as short as an insect's, she told herself. She looked over at Rick Hutter. How did the guy do it? There he was, trampling along with a gun, slung over his shoulder, struggling a little, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. For a moment, she envied him, even though she disliked him. She heard a moan. It was Erica, sitting in the back of the truck, with her arms wrapped around her knees. "Are you all right, Erica?" Karen asked her. "All right? Are you scared?" "Of course I am scared." "Try not to be too scared. It'll be okay," Karen said. Erica didn't reply. She didn't seem able to handle the pressure of this journey. Karen felt sorry for Erica and worried about her. Don McKinley paid a visit to the communications center at Nanajan, a small office equipped with encrypted radio gear and corporate wireless networking equipment. He spoke to a young woman who was monitoring all the corporate channels. "I want to try to get a ping from a piece of equipment we've lost in Manoa Valley," he said to the young woman. He gave her the serial number of the piece. What kind of equipment is it?" she asked him. "Experimental." He wasn't going to tell her it was an advanced hexapod from the Omnicron project. Typing commands by remote, the young woman switched on a high-power 72 GHz transmitter on the roof of the greenhouse in the Waipaka Arboretum. It was a line-of-sight transmitter. "Where should I point it?" "Northwest, towards Supply Station Echo." "Got it." Tapping a keyboard, she oriented the transmitter. "Now ping." The young woman entered a command and stared at the screen. "Nothing." She said, "Start pinging in a search pattern around that location." She worked the keys for a while. Still nothing happened. Now pointed the transmitter up the mountainside. 2 sequential pings. After she worked some more, she brightened. "Got it. It pinged me back." "Where is the equipment?" "Gosh, it's on the cliffs, halfway up Tantalus." She called up an image of the terrain on her screen and pointed to a spot on the mountainside, far above the bottom of Manoa Valley. "How did the equipment get there?" she asked. "I don't know," McKellar answered. Somebody had survived. They were now driving the hexapod straight up the mountain. Interesting. McKellar returned to Drake's office. "Just for the hell of it, I pinged the hexapod. I got a ping back. Guess what? The hexapod is halfway up to Tantalus Crater." Drake's eyes narrowed. What the hell? Somebody had survived. The predator that had eaten Telius and Johnstone. Can we find the hexapod, retrieve it? Those cliffs are really steep. I don't think we could reach the hexapod right now. Plus, we can't get a tight fix on it. We can get its approximate location on the cliffs, only good to 100 meters. A tiny smile formed at the corner of Drake's mouth and grew wider until it had become a grin. "I wonder, maybe they're heading for Tantalus Base?" "Yeah, could be." Drake broke into laughter. "Tantalus Base? Ha! I would like to see their faces when they see Tantalus. They're in for an ugly surprise if they get there. He became serious. You go up to the crater and make sure they get a surprise. I'll keep track of their progress. Rick was driving when there was a beep and the hexapod's communications panel lit up. A display flared. Answer back 23094-5451. What the hell was that? Rick said. Jenny slumped in the passenger seat next to him. Turn that thing off. I can't. It's just doing this shit on its own. Rick began to wonder. Was somebody trying to talk to them? Maybe it was Drake. But then the panel went quiet again. He had a feeling, though, that Drake might know where they were. If so, what would they do if Drake found them? The gas rifle would have no effect on a human of normal size. Karen walked alongside. The radio's acting funny, he said to Karen. She shrugged. The terrain trended upward at a steep angle. They came to a low cliff, and the walker climbed it. At the top of the cliff, they made their way around a bunch of sedge grass and came to a rock. Stop, Rick said. He advanced towards the rock. He had seen something under it. Something black and shiny. It's a beetle hiding under there, he said. Erica, what kind? Erica focused her attention on the beetle. It was a Metrominus, the same kind they'd seen when they'd first arrived in the microworld. Be careful, Erica said. They have a nasty spray. Exactly, Rick said. What's up? Karen asked him. It's a chemical war out there. We need chemical weapons too. We don't need it, Karen said to him. We've already got the benzo spray. She lifted the spray bottle out of her pocket. The self-defense compound that she had made in the lab, which she'd hoped to show to Vin Drake. But when she squeezed the pump, nothing came out. It had been used up spraying the centipede. Rick was determined to reload the bottle with spray. He crept ahead with a gas rifle, took aim, and fired at the beetle. The needle penetrated the beetle's shell. There was a muffled explosion, and the beetle shuddered and sprayed chemicals around in its death throes, until the air reeked of acids. Erica assured them there would be a lot of spray left in the beetle. Rick put on his mad scientist outfit, the rubber apron, the goggles, and the gloves, and he went to work. First, he flipped the dead beetle over on its back. Next, with his machete, he began tapping around on the jointed segments of the abdomen, looking for an opening. Erica gave him advice. Cut between segment 6 and segment 7. Lift the sclerate plates off, gently. Rick sliced into the beetle, working the blade along a joint between segments, then pried with his machete, lifting up the armored plates. They came off with a tearing sound, revealing fat. He started cutting into the fat carefully. "You're looking for a pair of chemical sacs at the base of the abdomen," Erica explained, kneeling next to Rick. "Don't burst a sac or you'll be sorry." Rick lifted out a football-shaped organ. Then another one. These were the chemical sacs. They were closed. Muscles clenched them shut. Following Erica's instructions, he cut the muscle, and the sac began to leak liquid. It stank. "That's benzo," Erica said. "It's mixed with caprylic acid, a detergent that helps the chemical stick to surfaces, which enhances its power as a weapon. Don't get it on your skin." It pleased Karen to see Erica interested in something for a change. Erica had gotten so quiet, so depressed. At least this would distract her. Rick collected the liquid in a bottle and screwed on the top. Then he handed it to Karen. "There you go, for your protection." Karen wondered at Rick. He certainly had energy. She should have thought of collecting more chemicals herself. Rick seemed quite skilled at this business of getting along in the micro world. He even seemed to enjoy it. It didn't make her like Rick Hutter any better, but somewhat to her surprise, she found herself glad to have him along on the journey anyway. "Thanks," she said to him, stuffing the bottle back in her pocket. "Don't mention it." Rick took off his outfit and stored it away, and they resumed their upward climb. The land grew impossibly steep. It went almost vertical, and they arrived at the base of the endless cliff. The cliff ran upward as far as the eye could see, an expanse of bubbly volcanic rock draped with lichens and hanging moss, and dotted with clumps of eruhe ferns. There seemed to be no way around it. "Damn the cliff. Full speed ahead," Rick said. They made sure the equipment was tied down, and then Rick jumped in back with Erica and tied himself in. Karen drove. The truck's feet stuck to the rock beautifully, and the truck moved upward. They made excellent speed, gaining altitude fast. But the cliffs just seemed to go on forever. The day was coming to a close, and they didn't know how far they had come, or how far they had to go. The battery readout showed that the power had been draining steadily. The vehicle had only about a third of its battery power left. "I think we should buy bivouac on the cliff," Rick finally said. "It may actually be safer than anywhere else." They found a ledge and parked the truck on it. It was a lovely spot, and it looked out over the valley. They ate the last of the katydid steaks. Then he spread out something in the back of the truck, where he intended to spend the night. His arm was clearly swollen. It felt bloated and lifeless. It didn't seem to belong to him anymore, but had become a dead weight. "Oh," he whispered. He clutched his arm and made a face. "What's the matter now?" Ricardo said to Danny. "My arm just popped." "Popped?" "Nothing. Just a noise in my arm." "Let's have a look," Rick said, bending over Danny. "No. Come on, roll up your sleeve. It's fine, all right." Danny's left arm had remained paralyzed, and it hung in the sling. The arm had packed the shirt sleeve, giving the sleeve a bulging, taut appearance. The shirt was filthy, too. "You might want to roll up your sleeve to let your skin get some air," Rick said. "That arm could get infected. Go away." "You're not my mother." Danny stuffed a rag under his neck as a pillow and curled up in the truck bed. Darkness fell over the Pally. The night sounds rose up again, the cryptic noises of insects. Rick settled down in the passenger seat. "You sleep, Karen. I'll stay up." "That's all right. Why don't you sleep, Rick? I'll do the first watch." They both ended up wide awake, keeping watch in smoldering silence as Erica and Danny slept. The bats came out, and squeals and echoes sounded near and far, crisscrossing the sky, as the bats plucked moths and other flying insects from the air. Danny stirred. "The bats are keeping me awake," he complained, but soon they heard him snoring. The moon climbed high over the Manoa Valley, turning the waterfalls into silver threads, falling into emptiness. Around one of the waterfalls, an arc of light glimmered. Rick stared at it. What was that light around? The waterfall. The light seemed to shimmer, change. Karen had noticed it too. She pointed the harpoon at it. "You know what that is, right?" "No idea." "It's a moon bow, Rick." She touched his arm. "Look, it's a double moon bow." He hadn't even known moon bows existed. Here they were, travelers in the dangerous Eden. It would be just his luck to be stuck in Eden with Karen King, of all people. He found himself glancing at her. Well, she was beautiful, especially in the moonlight. Nothing seemed to keep Karen down for long. Nothing seemed to defeat her. Karen King made a good partner for an expedition, even if they didn't get along personally. She did not lack courage. That was for sure. It was just too bad her personality was so unruly, so contrary. He drifted off and woke later to find that Karen had fallen asleep against him. Her head nestled on his shoulder, breathing gently.